Hi everyone, welcome to our brain hack for tonight. This is brain hack number 5. Let me go back to that and read it to you. So the brain hack tonight is level up your reading practice and read something that makes you think, such genres can include educational or philosophical. Keep a pen and paper handy to write down your inspiration as you read. Also, if you're a YouTube participant, so if you're on YouTube, I just want to invite you to subscribe. And I want to explain a little bit how YouTube works because a lot of people don't know. Subscriptions are free. Also, they don't spam you when you subscribe. I don't spam you. I don't send you anything. All it does is make my videos easy to find on YouTube. What it also does is it makes videos like mine easier to find. So YouTube uses all the channels you're subscribed to help let you know what's available. And so it's a really great resource. The only time they send you notifications is if you hit that little bell icon. So if you want to be notified when I'm live or I'm uploading new content, you hit that bell notification icon and you will get an email or a prompt to your phone and it'll tell you what I'm doing. If you don't want that, don't hit the bell. You can just hit the subscribe button and not hit the bell. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone and gives you what you need from YouTube. It's pretty obvious. I think Facebook already notifies you. So I will tell people that you may not see everything I post in Facebook. I've put a little note at the top of the Facebook page because Facebook defaults that it only shows you information it thinks is relevant from the private group. So if you want to make sure you're seeing all my posts, you need to go up to just below the banner and select your preferences and follow everything. So instructions are right there in that very top post. So with all of that said, what I'm going to talk about tonight is reading and why reading is important. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk about the different phases that are affected by different reading. There are different times where reading different types of content is better. I see Judy says you're reading about neurofeedback right now, and I love that you bring that up because I get to talk about what phase that is and what that means, how you can use that. In your practices. So this is all about practices and easy ways to integrate things we do in our day-to-day lives with our practices. So that's going to be my goal tonight, is to do that. I'm going to just talk at the level of phases, and I'm going to talk about phase 1. So we all understand that phase 1 practices are what we're doing to get out of that triggered state and into a rest and digest state. So at this phase, reading a complex book or educational books, if we have classes or studying or something like that to do, is not a good idea. So if you're triggered at all, if you're not in a rest and digest state, if you're in a fight or flight state, then it's really important to take that time to read recreational books. This is a really good time to do audiobooks or to do books that are easy reading, something like Harry Potter, or there are a lot of books that fit into that category that I've liked. Things like I've read book series with my kids, so things like Spiderwick or a series of Unfortunate Events. Books like these that are a little bit easier reading so that we're not putting a strain on the brain. So we want to remember that when we get triggered, we're in our least advanced state of consciousness. So I talk a lot about, in the classes I've spoken to, having this experience where when I first started controlling my brain function, I was really observing it. I was in a high observation state of it. And I had a trigger that was bad enough that I couldn't read. I could only recognize the lowercase letter r. And I was sick. I had all the other trigger effects. My digestive system was in complete upheaval. I was shaking. I couldn't breathe. I was sweating. All this stuff was happening. So I called my work. I knew what it was. I knew it was a trigger, and I knew it was an extreme trigger, and I knew what caused it too. And so I called my work, and I said, I can't come in today. I'm going to work from home. So I was a business manager at the time. So I just called my the people working for me and said, I'm going to work from home today. And I thought, well, I have a whole bunch of email to go through. So today I won't get paperwork and stuff done, but I'll go through and get my email cleared out so that I can, when I go back tomorrow, I can have a really light day, because I know today is going to put a toll on my body. So I climbed into bed and I opened my computer and I looked at my email, and it just looked like random symbols I couldn't recognize. It was the strangest feeling, because I'd never thought about what words must look like to small children. And I get it now. It literally looked like I love Celtic runes and the Celtic runic language. But it looked like that to me, just these strange symbols that I couldn't read. But I kept looking at the lowercase letter R and going, that looks really like that's an R. I know that's an R. I could not recognize. In fact, I remember spending several minutes trying to find an uppercase R and figure out what that looked like. But it was just a sign to me how regressive we can be when triggered. So we need to remember that our triggers. So I said a comment today that I love, and I'll probably start saying a lot. Think of your amygdala as your history, your family history. So it's all of the neurons that you adopted from your parents that were key to survival. And you used those in your first 9 years of life to define survival mechanisms. Well, sometimes we're at such a primal reaction that we might be like before we learned to read, or even before our ancestors learned to read. So for me, it was a realization, and I was so aware. I was observing myself. So in a moment like that, I'm not going to try and force myself to read, especially something complex. I don't want to panic or anything. So the best thing to do at that point is to just put on an audiobook, right? Or even like, I think of movies in the same area as I do audiobooks, because it is telling a story, right? We are sharing a story in a book the same way as we share a story in a movie. And so this is where we are when we're in that phase one. So trying at that point to read philosophy is going to be very challenging to the brain. And this made things a lot easier for me, because I take online courses a lot, or I study. I love to study the brain. And there were some days where I'm better at it than others. And it took me a while to understand why. But doing this work, I understand why. That if I'm at all triggered, even low-level stress, I'm not going to be as good at learning. This is where kids, like, for example, with ADHD, are struggling because they're triggered. That amygdala is triggered, and so their ability to focus and learn, right? Our prefrontal cortex is shut down. So that ability to take in new information is challenged. So it's better to do something that is comfortable and familiar. So that is phase one, right? We're not always in phase one, but just realize if you've had a stressful day and you're a person that likes to read, use reading as a self-soothing behavior. So first of all, read something that's not triggering, or read something that's easy, a nice story. This is why, ironically, stories like romance novels take up the lion's share of publishing. Most of us didn't know that, but they do, because it's an escape. And a lot of people that read those have triggered states, and they're reading them in that state. So whether however we perceive that genre, it's the way we comfort and soothe ourselves. And it's important to do that. But when we want to advance our brain function, we don't want to be stuck in that. So we don't want to limit ourselves to just those kind of books. So when we're having a better day, or once we're out of the triggered state, we want to upgrade a little bit. And this is where I want to bring up what Judy's reading, this neurofeedback. Neurofeedback right now is an educational book for Judy. So this is going to be a stage 2 practice. This is going to be firing our prefrontal cortex. This is going to be learning something new. So it's going to challenge the brain a little bit, which is really good for the brain. It's good for the brain to be challenged. So we're going to utilize this opportunity to improve our brain function and actually begin to shrink that amygdala. The more we learn, the more we shrink the amygdala, because the less we rely on that old data that we adopted or that we learned in early development. So this is a good time. I always talk about something that's challenging. This is the time where we want to read something that challenges our mind a little. So it could be educational. It could be philosophical. It could be another good one that I love to suggest to people is the classic books. Going back and reading a classic novel that is, say, from one of the Transcendentalists. I used to love to read Nathaniel Hawthorne, but to read Nathaniel Hawthorne's book, it takes a little more focus, a little more concentration. Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, Frankenstein. I love these books because they were social statements of the time. We have these movies of these old books that seem to be about Frankenstein is about this monster, but it's not. It's a social statement on people that are ostracized. And so they're very complex books. These are really great books to read if you're not into philosophy or educational books. Another thing is if you have a certain spiritual preference, you can read whatever book goes in line with that. So your spiritual or scriptural text. You can study that and read it. And this is really good for stage 2. Now, stage 2 is strictly that educational challenge the brain space. But what I want to include in what we're talking about today is phase 3. So when we look at phase 3 of the program, we're looking at moving beyond just challenging the brain. We're looking at developing the ability of the brain to communicate between those left and right hemispheres, to begin to stimulate that innovative thinking, that place where the brain gathers resources from more than just external data. So when we're children, we have to live from the outside in. We're taking on information to try and learn how to live in this new environment where we live. But there's a point where we need to utilize that information in a different way. And that's really what stage 3 offers us. It really helps us to advance to that next level of brain function. And so this is where we're still going to use educational, philosophical, spiritual, or complex text. We're going to read things that challenge our brain, that are difficult to read. But we're not going to just read anymore. So what I recommend when it comes to reading for a phase 3 practice is to pick your favorite books. So one of my favorite books to read that I've read in this context, right now I'm reading a lot about neuroscience and I'm loving it. But what my favorite one to read was The Tao of Physics. This is a great book because it's written by a physicist. And physicists are very dry and factual in their writing. They're just laying out points. So it's like reading a thesis. And he's putting forward a theory. So it is very much a thesis, in my opinion. And so what he's doing is he's explaining the fundamentals of physics. But then he's tying that together with Eastern philosophy, and showing that what a lot of the Eastern traditions have taught for centuries is actually being proven in modern physics. Now, there's a lot of conversation about what he put forth, and I don't want to get into that conversation, but what I do want to talk about is how I used this to do my phase 3 practice and the benefit I gained from it. And I'm hoping it will be a good explanation. And this will be what I'm describing to close out phase 3 tonight. So hopefully you'll get it. So if you have any questions, now would be the time to start posting them, because I will want to answer those when I'm done. Either that or we'll go ahead and log off for this brain hack, and I'll prepare for the private group. So phase 2 would say, okay, I'm going to read this complex book. And so I'm going to use the Tao of Physics as an example. And so I was reading the Tao of Physics. This was about 4 years ago. I was reading it, and I was reading some of it every day. I had just barely started this business, and there were a lot of times I was triggered and worried about money or something. And so I was using that as my practice to help me stabilize. And so what I did is I was reading the Tao of Physics. Now, this is what I recommend. You pick the book you're going to read, and then you keep either a computer with an open document near you or a pen and paper, and then, or a recorder. You could use a voice recorder as well, or record into your phone. I do a lot of voice to text. So to give you an example of this, what I'm going to suggest you do is you read until some inspiration hits you, until you go, oh, what if that means this? Or what if I could do that? You stop reading and start writing. Just put the book down and start writing out your ideas. And as you go back to do the book, let it be a reference point for contemplating those ideas. This is how innovators' minds work. And so what I did with the Tao of Physics as an example is I was reading it, and he was talking about the collision of molecules. And so he was talking about how every time molecules collide, they change directions, which makes sense, right? If they go like this, they're not going to both continue forward. They're going to move. Even if they skim each other, it's going to affect their trajectory. And suddenly I started to think about molecules as people. And I thought, that's true of people too. Every time I interact with a person, even if it's just someone I pass on the street, I change. They change. Our trajectory changes having interacted with someone. Think about cars on the freeway. If someone cuts you off, maybe you were in a good mood and now you're triggered. Or maybe they potentially cause an accident, which is going to change a lot of trajectories. But I started to think about that. Every single person I interact with creates for me an opportunity to think in a new way, to move in a new direction. And then he started talking about this idea of perfect collision, where if it is the right kind of collision, the molecules don't just bounce off of each other. The molecules get an energy burst, so they propel off one another. And so it's this idea so he presented this idea that a molecule comes in, if it's the right kind of collision, it propels off. The important thing is the molecule then has to carry itself on the propulsion that's organic. If it tries to control itself or anything like that, it creates inertia, which slows it down and it dies faster. But if the molecule just kind of rides the wave, then it can go further and potentially find another molecule to collide with. And in this way, it creates more energy. That collision actually is a spark of energy. And this is what's happening in our body to create electricity. Energy is this electrical component, right? We talk about having an energetic body, but we don't have an energetic being in some skin suit. We create energy. The human body is an energy producer. Think of a light bulb. A light bulb, electricity in the walls of your house is an energy producer. When you put a light bulb in, it is conductor of that energy. What happens to the light bulb? It gets hot, right? And so that heat is a sign of energy. Energy is heat. So humans, on average, and if healthy, maintain about 98.6 degrees of temperature every day. Now, this is the electrical energy in our body creating this temperature through the collision of molecules, through systems in the body creating heat. That's why we create heat, because we are energetic beings. Humans create energy. It's not that energy exists within the human body. The human body creates the energy, and this is what creates an aura. This is what creates an energetic field of heat that can be measured on thermal imaging, things like that. So it's this natural occurrence. However, if we strain, if we push too hard, we deplete our energy. However, if we can collide with the right kind of people in the right way, they energize us. If I interact with someone and it is what I've come to call a perfect collision, I feel fired up when I walk away. I feel excited for what I'm about to do next. And I'm very aware of this. And I love to interact with people that bring this out in me. And I know the people who do. And so this is a sign that that's a good collision for me. If I walk away from another person and I feel depleted or drained, they didn't drain my energy. I'm not out of energy that I have to go restore. I'm in a situation where the collision is not stimulating energy within me. So I'm just feeling that my own systems aren't producing at the level. And that has a lot to do with being triggered. That has a lot to do with the amygdala engaging and the histamine shutting off systems. So we talk about that in brain chemistry. I'm not going to dig into that now. So this becomes, though, what the opportunity of reading has done. I read maybe a page and a half of what he had written about molecular collision. And all of a sudden I started to tie molecular collision to human collision. And I wrote for almost an hour because of that stimulation. And it changed my neurochemistry. It changed the way I think. It changed my experience. And it wasn't my conscious mind creating it. It was my subconscious mind putting together puzzle pieces that my conscious mind caught on to when I read his book. So this is a great opportunity to go into phase 3 practices. If you ever struggle with phase 3, read a book that inspires you. Read a book about meditation, or read a book about education. Learn something new. I'm doing a lot of education right now in marketing. So I've been taking marketing classes, and I go out of those classes fired up with ideas about my business and what I want to do next and shifting. I don't teach the way I did 2 months ago because of what the marketing classes have stirred in me. But if I just take the marketing, so we get into this habit of reading books. Even self-help books are good in this genre. So of reading the self-help book and we get to a point in the self-help book and we're like, oh my gosh, that's what I need to do. That's what in my life, that's what will change everything. This is exactly what I need in my life. And then we turn the page and go on to the next chapter. What we need to do is in that moment when we're inspired to start writing, because then we're stimulating. Again, if we think of the amygdala as a muscle, it's a muscle we were born with that has a lot of stored information into it. Now we need to work a different muscle. And if you spend your time writing ideas and getting fired up and writing about that, you're building a new muscle. That muscle will eventually become stronger. The amygdala will reduce, and then it will be less involved in your life. You'll trigger less. So that's really our goal. That's our goal, is to start stimulating that. If you do want to know more about the brain, I apologize. I've done the whole brain hack from that window, which I think is not a big deal. Hopefully it's given you some focus that isn't necessarily my face. So I'm going to recommend going to inspiredevolutionproject.com. going to education courses, and then relief of suffering free course. So it's the phase 1 course, and you'll get all the details on these phases in the brain. If you haven't taken that course, I recommend it. Even if you know a lot about the brain, even if you've been in my meetups, if you've never taken that online course, the first thing I'll tell you is it has the content from my new book there that is not going to be published until it's signed. I'm not going to self-publish that book. I have an editor right now that is putting out query letters to find an agent for me. So if you want to read my new book, that's the place to read it. Plus there are some great exercises in there to get information on, or to actually apply this information on changing the brain chemistry. It helps solidify the understanding of how the brain works. So we will be... So you'll be able to do that. At the end of the last 20 seconds of this video, there will be a button which gives you an opportunity to subscribe. Along with that, there's going to be the first video for that brain hack course. And on that video will be a link to go join the class. I will be, so you'll have the subscribe button. Then another video will pop up that's 1 of 9. And that's the beginning of the videos for that brain hack course. So you can go ahead, or not brain hack course, that brain chemistry course. So you can go check it out. And then in addition, there will be a playlist that shows up for all of the brain hack videos. So if there's any you've missed, you can catch them there. You can also catch them on the website under the videos and articles page. So I think that'll be it for tonight. I'm really excited about this. Next week, we'll be talking again about triggers, but in conjunction with the release of my new free online drug and rehab program. Yeah, this is a free rehab program that I'll be releasing this week. In light of that, next week, I will be talking about triggers and about addiction and about how triggers really begin and how it can be a really arduous journey to try and control the triggers from the state of the triggers and easier ways to control them and what's really driving addiction in the first place. So that'll be our Did You Know next week. And from there, I will continue deepening into that, deepening into the coursework. So I'll only be talking about rehab that one time. That's going to be a completely separate website. If you want to check out that website, we're just developing it now, but it's called yourwayrecovery.org. So I'm just barely creating the content. I'll be working on that tonight and tomorrow, but you'll be able to start seeing that come to light, and I will be sharing it on the social media sites. So that's kind of exciting. For those of you in the private group, the Advanced Practices Content Group, I will be live on Zoom with you at 7 o'clock to do the first session of the Science Behind Miraculous Healing course. I have that all set up and ready to go, and a new way to do it that I think will work brilliantly. So I just want to thank everybody for joining me. I really appreciate you being here.